Board members, let's go ahead and get jump back into this. We have some.
Can I make a motion for 3 more minutes?
No. I know you. Member Booth, go ahead.
So it was my birthday a couple of days ago.
Let's get your mic on.
Gave me a box of See's chocolates, and I said I want to share them with my friends. So here they are. Just pass them down. I'm leaving the guide of what here, so you can take a look and see what you'd like to.
Thank you. Yeah, personal privilege. Member Booth's birthday the other day, and we all get to reap the rewards. Thank you. Board members, we have I don't want to say unique situation. We have a situation here. We have begun. Oh, you know what? I'm going to turn time over to Chair Carey, since this is his committee, and he's going to explain what's happening here. How's that? Chair Carey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just, and I apologize to the full board, but the sheet that we're called to read from has listed drafts, and I have assumed that they were the ones that passed out of committee. That has not always been the case, and so I'm, and I appreciate Vice Chair Bollinger bringing this one to my attention, which is, and Vice Chair Bollinger, I give her credit, she actually went back and watched the committee hearing to make sure that we're on the same page. But for this matter that we're currently discussing, R27609, draft 3 is the one that came out of committee. The notes for this indicate that it was draft 4, but draft 4 did not come out. So I just wanted to bring that up to the full board. We'll tighten up our procedures, Chair, and make sure that, you know, we get on that alignment page. But I just wanted to share that with the board. Thank you.
Thank you. So in response to that, and we've got other information that Chair Carey's going to share, and he'll remember it in just a second. So if we want to move draft 4, we're going to need somebody to make a sub motion for draft 4. Now let me remind the board what is currently on the table, and then a different direction that we're going to go in, just for a moment, because we have a hard stop at 11:30. And so that's what Chair Carey is going to address in just a second here. Not a hard stop. We have individuals, time certain, yes, thank you. So I'm going to ask that we almost start over, and I don't have Vice Chair Hart with me. She's got an amendment on the floor for this 5.6 agenda item, and I want to respect that. So if it pleases the board, we're going to bounce things around a little bit. We're going to ignore. I don't even want to take a vote to table or anything, but let's ignore 5.6 for a second, and I'm going to turn time back over to Chair Carey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, with that, I'd like to draw the board's attention to item 5.3. This is the matter we skipped as it was set for a time certain at 11:30. It's my understanding that the individuals from Center for School of the Future are online and will be participating that way. So I would like to move pursuant to 5.3. The motion for the board is that the board approve the interagency data sharing agreement with Utah State University Center for School of the Future. And it's my understanding that Director Chalice will be present to answer any of the board's questions in that regard.
Okay, so the motion before the board is that the board approves the interagency data sharing agreement with Utah State University's Center for School of the Future. I've got just no drafts on this one as far as I know. Is that correct? There are 2 drafts, Chair Carey? Draft 2, thank you. So
thank you.
The motion before the board that the board approves the interagency data sharing agreement with Utah State University's Center for School of the Future, draft 2. I've got lights from Member Lear, Member Davis, and Member Boggess. Member Lear.
I would like to hear the
Okay. Member Davis is not at her seat. Member Boggess.
Sir, I would like to save my questions until the presentation.
Okay, and I don't see, oh, she's back there. Katie, can you join us? I believe there's a Member Bogus is requesting a presentation. I don't know if that. I did not, I don't have a presentation. Would you like to, we could invite Katie to speak to this, or Chair Carey. Member Bogus, the floor is yours. What would you like?
I'm happy to wait.
Okay.
I honestly thought you had indicated there would be a presentation, and I was just willing to wait to see if my questions would be answered
Okay.
in that presentation.
Well, there's no presentations, but we do have Katie, who is here for questions. So I'm going to look towards Member Davis. And then if you do have a question that would clear things up, then please. Okay. We have Vice Chair Wood.
I would like to know, when it came out of committee, we had some concerns. We were to go back and collaborate, as the law says. Were there collaborations done, and what changes can you specifically call out that have been amended due to the collaboration?
Katie, please.
Thanks. Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. I'm happy to speak to that. So yes, we were able to collaborate with the Center for School of the Future. I'll tell you how the original request differs from the result of that collaboration. So the original request was achievement data for all students in the state of Utah for a span of about 10 years. In communication with the center, we came to an agreement to sort of divide that a little bit. So for any LEAs that are participating in the pilot program, CSF will receive all student data, including the identifiers for those students, such as their name, their student ID, and so on. However, for students who attend LEAs not participating in the program, those CSF will still receive student level data for those students. However, common identifiers such as name, student ID, SSID will be removed, which our feeling is that significantly reduces the risk. In the event of a data breach, for example, it would be much more difficult for someone who had access to that data to re-identify the students. So it is a significant, in our estimation, a significant reduction in risk.
Thank you. Does that answer Vice Chair Wood's question? We have Member Bollinger and then Member Lear. Did you cut her mic? Okay. Member Green and then Bollinger, then Lear.
So the LEAs that choose to go into this, if I may, through the board, will parents be given some kind of form or that they sign to allow that to happen? Or does it just happen? Like, can you explain those dynamics?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. No, there's nothing stated in this agreement that would require the LEAs to obtain consent from parents, nor would they be notified of the data sharing.
Follow up, Member Green.
So what we're doing, in essence, we would vote for this to happen, but without the consent of the owners of the data?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think that's a true statement. That's not, to be fair, that's not out of the ordinary. Other agreements, while this one is larger in scope than most agreements than you hear that are brought before you, it's not uncommon for the board to make decisions about data sharing that does not involve the consent of the parent. That being said, yes, your assessment is correct. The parents would not consent to this.
Thank you. Let's move to Member Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a clarifying question, if that's okay, Chair, to Director Chalice. So when we were talking about this in the Law and Licensing Committee, I definitely have concerns about the large scope of the identifiable data and chose to push it through to the whole board because I think it's something that all of us need to be discussing because this is a big responsibility that we have to protect our students' data. I also voted for it to come through because we were willing to look at a compromise, which it sounds like it's done. One of the pieces of information as I've looked through the materials, and I just wanted to clarify with you, is the teacher identifiable data for schools that are not participating. My understanding is they're going to be using the Cactus ID number. Is that not an identifiable piece of data?
Yeah, Chair, that's a great question. And we negotiated this with the center. For students, USBE has in our databases a unique identifier that is different from an SSID. It's different from a local ID. We have that identifier in our systems. For educators, that is not the case. The only identifier that we have that's aside from their name and other information, well, we have social security number, but that's obviously off the table, is the Cactus ID. So the feeling was that the limit to which we could de-identify those educators was by removing their name and other information, but the Cactus ID really is our only option in terms of a steady identifier in our databases.
Chair, if I may.
Please.
And I bring this up because I was one of the data scientists from a district in my area reached out, concerned that there is still that identifiable data and just the scope of that. So thank you for the clarification.
We have a brief question from Vice Chair Hart, and then we're on to Member Lear, then Member Earl.
I just want to follow up on the cactus thing. So can't the public go and look up a teacher, and when they look up the teacher, doesn't the cactus number show? I think when you do an educator lookup, does it or does it not? Google me and there I knew I yes. Okay, yeah, great, here I am.
So if you go to the Cactus Educator lookup, there are two options. First, last name, district charter, and school. And I'm just going to search myself here just because that's fair
Well,
and
you
sporting.
can, I'm up there, I don't mind being up there.
But it does not seem to show the Cactus ID in here. But if I search my own Cactus ID,
That's what
I
it
do
is.
pop. So if someone has access to Cactus IDs, there is a Google function that can identify you through an alternate pathway, and hopefully that gives us better
So
context.
there is no way, unless the public knew my cactus number already, there is no way for, it doesn't really, it's not considered a PI. To me, that's not as, do you understand what I'm, well. My point is that I had remembered that there was something about cactus when in the educator lookup function, and if that showed my cactus, I would share that concern. But since it doesn't show my cactus number, I have less of a concern about that. I just wanted to resolve that in my own brain. Thank you.
Thank you. We are on to Member Lear.
I have a couple of questions. One, I wanted to Molly's question and point. That's no different than a student ID number, which we are so protective of. You can't see the student's ID number if you look at a class roll or you look at those anything else, an outside individual, though a parent has access to the student's ID number. So I feel like we are very protective of the students' ID numbers, even though those don't show either, but now we're okay with using cactus numbers, even though it's in the same situation as the students. And one can argue they're employees, not as much protection as students, but I'm equally concerned about protecting teachers. So, but to my second point, well, I have two more, sorry. To my second point, I also recall that there's something in the rules, and I'm happy to be corrected if I'm misremembering, but I thought there was something in the rules that told teachers that their Cactus ID numbers will only be used for certain purposes. They won't be used, and I don't know if it's will only be used for certain purposes or won't be used for certain purposes, but I thought there was some protection in there for teachers and their, that ID number.
Looks like we've been joined by Dr. Height to respond.
Yes, good morning, Dr. Height, Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. So it is not specifically in rule, however, the Cactus identification is considered personally identifiable information for educators, and so it's not published publicly.
So we are at least breaching a sort of a business rule we've had with educators for a long time. Would that be true?
And we do, as you're thinking about that, we do have a point of information. Remember Real?
Thanks, Chair. I was doing an experiment, so I searched my mom, who's an educator in Utah, Kimberly Real Cactus number, and it popped up as the first result with her Cactus number. So I'm sure that the SEO is going to be different based on the searches that you're doing, but it definitely is something that can be public and found because it was the first search result when I searched my mom's name and Cactus number.
Thank you for that information. I don't know what that does for whatever's happening here, but back to member that, okay. Yeah, I think it's back to you, member Lear. Then we've got member Earl, Chair Carey, and then member Kelly.
Okay, and my last question or concern is that I understand there is a bill right now in the legislature that would add still another researcher to this mix of researchers in this process. And that concerns me, of course, because here we have this precious, so protected student data that's going to go still to another researcher. Those of you who are the data, usually the proponents of protecting student data, still possibly, if this bill passes, would go to still another researcher. And my understanding is this agreement would not come back to the board. Following, if that changes, there would still be adding a researcher, but the board doesn't have another opportunity to say, now there are at least two, and a lot of data that might be used by these researchers. So I don't know, I'm not really asking you to respond to that, but I have one more final question. When we say the student, I'm not going to get into the teacher data, which I think deserves equal protection, but the student data, so what will exactly be released to these legislators, or to these, Freudian slip there, to these researchers? What PII from students will be released? It'll be, go ahead, I'll let you say.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I am happy to answer what was not a question earlier if you'd like, but I'll answer your last question first. So if you pull up the agreement, we're going to find the data that will be shared on beginning on page 9.
Okay.
The scope of the data is I'll say threefold. So one for the students. We're talking about where the student is enrolled, tying the student to their teacher, so enrollment type data, what courses they're taking. There's also what we sometimes call demographic data, which can include, race, ethnicity, but also can sometimes, or in this case, will include an indicator of whether or not the student is economically disadvantaged, whether or not they are a student with disabilities. It's pretty sensitive. And then also achievement data surrounding the RISE assessment, Utah Aspire Plus, Acadience, WIDA.
About address?
No address.
Okay. And the other piece will be the student ID number.
Yes, so we'll add name, student name, SSID.
Oh, name. And so
And
if there's a
their SSID.
breach, you'd be able to connect the student's name to the ID number.
Yeah.
Okay, think that, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, would you like me to speak to the topic of the third?
The new bill.
The new-
Well,
I don't, that's up to you.
do I?
it
I
is
don't
up to
have,
you.
as chair, I don't have personal preferences anymore. So it's whatever you guys
You
want.
must have been elected by ranked voting.
Let's just go to Member Earl and we'll see if that answer comes out in the woodwork here.
Yeah, my question has to do with the time frame. My understanding was the intention was to go back 10 years. Did that get altered at all, or is it still?
Go ahead, Director Chalice.
Yeah.
The Chair, the duration of the range of time has not changed. So it would, starting in the 2015-2016 school year, up through the 2028-2029 school year.
Thank you. Over to Chair Carey.
Hey, Director Chalice, thank you. And I know that we have the folks from Center for School of the Future online, and I have questions for them as well. But Director Chalice, I want to thank you for your time on this. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I know when you came before Law and Licensing, you had, again, my words, several concerns about the scope and breadth of this data request. And in the time I've served on the board, I don't think I've ever seen Director Chalice as concerned as she was when she came before Law and Licensing. And because of that, we asked Director Chalice and we asked Center for School of the Future, Center for School of the Future to work together to see if there was the opportunity to come to some ground that would make board members feel more comfortable. I don't think we'll get to the point of being comfortable, but more comfortable with where we were. And two of the big additional protections that came out of that was, as you mentioned, for those non-participating LEAs, their student data would be de-identified. And the other one would be the Cactus identifier for our educators. Is that correct? And it's my understanding that there's actual law that designates Center for School of the Future by the legislature to come up with various models to research which one could best help narrow and identify the data sets that they're looking at. Is that correct? We don't have a say in the models that Center for School of the Future chooses. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
And that same law actually says that the data that they need to conduct the research that they've identified as the one that they want to use, USBE needs to provide that data. Is that correct?
My reading of the statute, Chair, is that USBE is obligated to share data. The bill does not spell out what data. Now I'm all sensitive about my use of data as a plural.
That's
The data are. Thank you. I need to become converted. The bill does not spell out the data, and as you mentioned, the center has is charged with choosing the model. The language in the bill is that the USBE and the center shall collaborate on the data sharing.
And we had a long discussion about the word collaborate in law and licensing. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at the end of that committee hearing, Board Member Hall and myself voted against moving this to the full board because we felt that if there were additional time for you to work with Center for Schools of the Future, that maybe we could get additional protections in place under the strictures of the law that was passed. And I want to thank you for working with School of the Future in that regard. Let me ask you this. The data requests, as reflected in the proposed agreement, is there any data that Center for School of the Future is requesting that you have determined is non-essential to the research model that they've identified? Are they getting any data that you feel, well, they don't need this given the model they've chosen?
I would say to the extent that the center is hoping the model will be as accurate and effective as possible, they have requested this scope of data. Any research can be conducted with smaller data sets. It just often you don't have as accurate or as perhaps trustworthy results. So I can't say definitively that they could not conduct their work without this scope, but it is their wish for this scope because they feel that it'll help enhance their data modeling assessment.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Carey. If I can sum, I've never been in a courtroom, but this might be as close as I got.
Sorry.
No, and it wasn't harsh. I think what I'm doing is I'm gathering your questions, and please correct my summation if I'm wrong. We're required by law to give data. And the Law and Licensing Committee, in my opinion, has had a robust discussion on how much we're required to give and how much we can protect. And because we're caught in the middle of something that, quite frankly, Law and Licensing for the past 2 years at least has not really wanted to give away data. But we recognize that sometimes we have to, and this is one of those times. Is that a correct summation, Chair Carey, or would you like to add to that before I move on to our next board member? And can we get, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right in that the law does require us to provide the data that, in my understanding, they need to do the modeling that they've identified. We don't have a lot of say in those things. To the extent that they've requested this data, and it looks like, as it says, it's varying degrees, right? Like maybe if they have this much more data, their models are 0.0001 more accurate. And you can debate that, but as we've gone through this, it's my understanding that the data they've requested is related to the research they are conducting, and because of that, there is a legal obligation for us to provide that data. Having said that, it doesn't mean we have to be happy about it. It does say they have to collaborate with us. I feel they've met that burden. They could have taken the position that we want all the data and we want it all identifiable. And I want to recognize Director Chalice. I want to recognize School for the Future because they did have a very short window to get together, to work together, to come up with the compromise, which is now draft 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we have a few comments still. Just a reminder that the motion before the board is that the board approves the interagency data sharing agreement with Utah State University's Center for the School of the Future, draft 2. And we're moving on to Member Kelly.
I took on the experiment of searching my own Cactus number. This is a computer that I've never logged on to Cactus on. Other computers where I've logged on to Cactus, I could search it and pull it up no problem. But this computer I haven't. This is my board computer, and I haven't ever been logged on to, and I couldn't find. So in response to Board Member Reel's challenge, I did the same thing for my own Cactus number and wasn't able to find that and search that. Yeah.
Thank you. Member Bogus.
Thank you, sir. So I genuinely, Director Chalice, I cannot for the life of me understand why the School of the Future needs very protected information like free and reduced lunch status, reasons for absences, what their native language might be. Some of this is just over the top, and we just had a power school breach, and everybody that was affected by that got a letter. And that data breach was all this information that was breached, and now we're just gonna send it out there and we're not telling anybody except for the scope of this meeting. And this is highly protected information. I see some language in here about I forget the language used, but basically using the algorithms to convert and market to people and the parameters around that. But what's the accountability for that? How do we say, hey, we know you're doing this and you can't do this, so give us all the data back? Like there's no accountability in this document that I can see. I know there was a question in there. I'm hoping you get my concern and my question. Thank you.
Director Chalice.
Yeah, thank you. There are provisions in place that give the board some recourse if the data are misused by the center or by their subcontractor that they're partnering with, which is SAS EVOS. The recourse is not punitive necessarily. It would mean that the contract could be terminated and that they would be obligated to destroy the data, so they wouldn't be facing a penalty per se. But I would say that's the extent of the recourses that are outlined in the contract, but they are there.
Thank you. Follow-up, brief.
So now we're not just talking about a third party to the USBE, we're talking about a fourth party that is gaining access to this data. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes, so under this contract, and this is true of other contracts as well, the CSF is allowed to partner and disclose the information that they store with a subcontractor. In this case, the subcontractor that they have indicated they'll be partnering with is SAS EVOS. So yes, it would be the data would ultimately be going to the center and then the third party SAS EVOS.
Thank you. Director Chalice, Member Bogus. Is there anybody on the school of the future that has a response to Member Bogus's question? Do we have any hands online? Okay. We have John.
Yes, this is Stephen Forbush. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, so Dr. Forbush, Utah State University Associate Director for the Center for the School of the Future. So thank you very much. Certainly been listening to the discussion and appreciate the opportunity that we had to engage Katie Chalice, Aaron Brough, and others. What this bill is about, and then I'll answer the question directly, is that we're trying to work in behalf of delegates, not primarily as researchers, but as delegates to the legislature in terms of putting in place a teacher merit award system. The purpose of that is, of course, to identify the highest performing teachers in Utah based on their ability to bring student learning. That's a longer discussion, but that's what we're trying to do here. And the challenge, of course, for you all and for us as well, being in legislatively installed institution to accomplish things in behalf of education in the state of Utah, is how do we all collectively protect data, but not so extensively that we can't actually do the good with that data that needs to be done with it in terms of improving educational outcomes for students and recognizing those that are most capable in doing so. So there's all of that. Back to the question. We are required in the fall of every year as delegates to the legislature in this particular matter to report to them our findings. And so what we've attempted to do is to collect the kinds of data that will help us to provide the most robust report to them about what we're coming to know about teacher performance and what we're learning about it and how to further propagate that within the system. So in terms of the data types that we've asked for, we wanted to keep it as circumspect as it could be needed to be, to keep it safe, while at the same time as broad as necessary to capture the information that would help the legislature and frankly all of us to improve this system over time. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. That is helpful. Board members, I've got lights from Member Davis, Member Green, and Member Earl. And let's keep in mind, if the questions are great, we can keep them coming. If it's not going to change your vote, we could probably take those to offline. If this is something where you're still like, I'm not sure I'm going to vote, let's bring it out. But I'm sensitive of time. We still have a couple of other items on the Law and Licensing Committee. So just keep that in mind as we're moving forward. And let's go to Member Davis.
I'm just wondering, are all teachers looked at for the merit pay, or just the teachers who contract to work with this center?
From what I'm understanding, it's all teachers are looked at.
If all teachers are looking at and can receive the merit pay, not just those who work with, you're saying no, only those who work with this department can receive the merit pay. You know, either way, you can access value-added reports that are de-identified. And that also takes out factors like, you know, oh, well, they didn't progress because they started out lower. Well, a value-added report starts a student where he or she is and then looks at the data of how much growth was there. And then, you know, you can combine those to get a sense of who's having a lot of growth, and that information can be de-identified, and that would be my preference as to how the information is collected for them to do, you know, what they need to do.
Thank you. Member Green.
Yeah, so I'm actually just trying to figure out the statement that was made by Member Carey about, and others, that this is in the law, that we have to get the data. So I'm trying to reconcile that. And Section 8 talks about that, and I'm just trying to figure out if it lists specifically what data is required. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't read that way, which then I'm tagging over to this agreement, and what I'm trying to figure out is the agent, this agreement has been created from these two parties. So they've decided what information, what data they want, they need, and maybe they're making it broader just to cover their bases, you know, initially as they're starting out. Is that true? Did they decide, the party decide what data they are going to be requesting? And that data isn't in the law. It isn't dated, stated specifically in the law. Is that correct?
Director Chalice.
Yeah, Chair, that is, I think, yeah, that is correct. That they communicated to us what they were hoping to collect. There was some negotiation, so I feel confident that they're not seeking data elements that are beyond the scope of what they're trying to accomplish. But yes, it was communicated from them to us what they needed in order to accomplish their desired task.
Thank you.
May I follow up?
Follow up, yes.
So I just wanted to maybe make it clear that the law didn't say what data to give. This was actually formulated through the agreement. And by voting for or against this, we are, in essence, deciding what data we are determining is okay to give away without, say, parental consent or not even parental consent, but teacher consent, all of the above. Is that correct?
Yeah, I agree with that assessment.
I mean, we could get parental consent. You know, we could get them, the teachers, say, hey, your parents need to make sure that we have that. We've got Member Earl and then Member Lear.
So about right after Christmas, so about 3 weeks ago, was that 3 weeks ago, right after Christmas? Okay. I got a notice in the mail from my son, he's 26 years old, and it's from Granite School District. It notified me all the items that probably, social security number, all this personal identifiable information. I don't know when we attended Granite School District. Like, I'm still going, what program did we sign up for that my data was somehow in their system? I still don't know. So and that's, he graduated, 8 years ago? So I understand what they're trying to do at the School of the Future. I think I talked to them last summer. They're doing all their research right. They're trying to get the best model. They're trying to get the best, most effective method. I'm struggling with this request. It is heavy, and we are the protectors of the data. And that's where I get they're saying, okay, what can we do to be the most effective? At the same time, this is so much. It doesn't take, I know enough about data that it doesn't take more than about 5 or 6 connectors, right? It's not 2. Usually that's a little harder, but 5 or 6 connectors. So that's the part where and I have no doubt that whatever entity they're, contracting with is going to do their best to protect the data. It's just, I don't know, it's a heavy lift. Even though we're obligated in law to provide them data to be successful, I still am just really struggling. And I guess if I just didn't have that Granite thing come across at my house, that I'm looking at that going, when did we attend something that put his information into Granite's system? So.
Thank you. Member Lear, and then Vice Chair Wood.
I've been turning my light off and on because I can't decide if I want to ask this, and it kind of goes to the question that I didn't really ask, but I just was looking at provision number 11 on the agreement that was just up before, just close to where Member Green, and it says if this contract is amended, then it can only be amended with written consent of the parties, and the board's one of the parties. So I'm assuming, back to my concern about the bill that is moving in the legislature, that because of that provision, if that bill passes, I'm assuming that I don't know how the additional party, maybe it's not even a party or a subcontractor, fits into this agreement, but I would assume and expect that the board could then revisit if we want to even further extend our data into another subcontractor. Does anybody know if the board would have the opportunity to then look at this agreement again in light of a third or a second subcontractor? I've lost track. That's the question. Was that too garbled? Did you get what I'm asking? Yeah. Okay,
Katie,
thanks.
please.
Is that okay if I ask Katie that question? Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, so such an arrangement with an additional third party, as you mentioned, would come to the board. It wouldn't come via a data sharing agreement. It would come via a contract.
Like an amendment to a contract?
No, it would be a brand new contract because we're not well, as I understand, we don't partner with any vendors currently that could meet the requirements that are in that bill that you're referring to, which is what? I can't remember. HB something. Or SB something.
I want to say 99.
99, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right, so we would contract with them, and as a result, that would come to the board for your
Okay,
consideration.
all right. That's helpful to know that we will yet again be able to spend an hour or so discussing this.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wood.
So I'm not sure how to ask this, but I have 2 questions. So one, in terms of we're tracking rosters of teachers. Some of our teachers may have very few students. How does this data in terms of N sizes, and because then when you have a very small N size, it is easy to identify students. If you have a teacher with 5 students and one is has a is a SPED student, one is a multilingual student, it's easy to tell who's who. So this relates to my second question in terms of SB 99 and this web-based portal. What of this data will be there? And if we're exposing to a web-based, we're opening up another channel for data to be breached. And I may be completely wrong. I'm hoping you can help me understand and clarify that better.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to answer what I understood to be your second question first. In a contract that we entered into, so assuming SB 99 passes, we would be required, the USB would be required to enter into a contract with someone who would provide the portal that you're describing. In that contract, they would be obligated to apply what we call disclosure avoidance techniques for any data that are publicly viewable, which would include very small class sizes. So I feel I can state with confidence that assuming the vendor we partner with does not push back on our terms and conditions, that they would be obligated to prevent what you're talking about, where the public would be able to see class sizes with low end sizes and then deduce information about the students. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
So one follow-up then. So then would we say that the data that will be accessed through that web portal will not be 100% accurate in the fact that it won't show the true picture if we have to hide those areas that would potentially identify students?
Yeah, so I'm gonna give a little bit of background that is kind of in the works, but my understanding is that there's been, the board made a motion in your legislative meeting, I think 2 weeks ago, to seek greater clarity on what is meant by that web-based portal. And so there's been some communication going on in the background about that. And my current understanding, and then maybe Deputy Nui can correct me if I'm wrong, is that that portal is intended to be really LEA, authorized users at LEAs would view it. So I think we were under the impression, myself and the board were under the impression it might be public facing. Based on those email conversations, it doesn't appear that that is the case. And as a result, individual teachers would see student level data. LEA, authorized LEA folks would be able to see that as well.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Davis.
I don't have motion language ready, but I think if these folks are working with specific LEAs, they should be able to work with the LEA, not us, to get de-identified information and value-added reports and any other important information that they need to make these determinations. And in our LEAs already, there are typically two things. For like my own child, for example, the LEA is working with certain vendors or groups to help improve learning or using tools, and they list it on the side of the screen, and we opt out of any of the ones we don't want information shared with. Then on the front other side of the screen, you opt in for advertising to higher ed or to the military. They can do this on their own LEA screens with the center. And when they provide it, they can work that out with the LEA. Why are they coming to, why do they want us to give all of this information and then we have to keep track of, you know, who's working with them, who isn't working with them, what is de-identifiable, what isn't it? Where are the value-added reports? Do we have them down to the individual level? It would be so much better for the LEA who's working with them, and they would get better information, rich conversations. Even if the data is de-identified, they would get what they need to do what they need to do. That would be, I would prefer we go back and suggest something like that. And if I need to make a motion, I can make a motion, but I guess
If you don't make a motion, I'm going to put the motion that's already here, and we're going to vote on it.
Okay, I move for this as an alternative. Can we explore that with the center? Because it would just work already within the systems that they have. It would be just the LEAs that are working with the center. If everybody can't receive the merit pay, only those who work with the center, they should be working with the LEAs.
So there's a developing motion in action here.
Okay, so the motion on the board is that the board direct staff to explore alternatives with the center to gather de-identified data from those LEAs who are participating with the center.
Expressed that they did not want to put the burden on the LEAs. Just information. That doesn't mean you can't make the motion. I'm just saying it.
If I can just speak quickly, this was not something that was taken lightly by the committee. We knew that this would be discussed in the full board to this extent. Like we timed this out. It's taken a little bit longer than we thought. Nobody is happy about this, right? If there were other ways to do it, but law is law. And yes, we can take a vote. Like we can put this amendment together and we can vote on it, and I'll vote no. I'll speak against a motion that's potentially on the table. And then I might get called up to somewhere in the Capitol and say, this is what the board wanted. As I said before in here, I don't have an opinion. This is what the board wanted. I welcome you to come down here and say, this is the law, and maybe we'll vote again. I don't know. But again, this has been vetted and beaten, and we've talked about it in here. We protect data. Our board loves to protect data. And I give credit to the committee for their work on this. And so essentially I'm speaking for the underlying motion. So with that personal privilege, sorry, I had the mic. I'm going to go back to Member Davis.
Okay, but I mean, Chair, if that's the will of the board, then that's the will of the board. But my motion is to explore an option that is, I think, preferable. And the LEAs may not want the burden, but they are choosing to participate in the project. And they have the best information and the people who are best equipped to speak of the information, and they're working with these folks. So, it literally is just for them to go and explore the option with the center. They can still get what they need to do their important work.
Let's get a second, and you're speaking to it, and I want to bring this back to you, but let's just get a second if there is one. So the motion is that the board directs staff to explore alternatives with the center to gather de-identified data from those LEAs who are participating with the center. Is there a second? We've got a couple of seconds. Okay. Member Davis, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I know you've spoken to it, but is there anything additional you want to add to this?
Yes. I just want to say a caveat. If our Attorney General say, look, it has to be us, then we should seek a code change, or an additional code piece that says they go to the LEA first, they get the data. If they want us to verify or to do anything with it, that's fine. But the best, most rich data they're going to get is through the individual LEAs.
Thank you. We're over to Chair Carey and then Member Lear.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to speak against the motion. I think, from what I understood from Director Chalice, this was already explored with the Center for Schools of the Future. And if I may, Chair, I'd like to direct a question to Associate Director Forbush from the Center for Schools of the Future.
Please.
It's my understanding, Mr. Forbush, that the model that you chose requires this data in order to assess the schools that are have opted in. And I believe that we discussed this. One of the concerns with going to each LEA is if you have an LEA that says, we don't want to turn over our data, it's not that it protects the data for that LEA. It torpedoes the plan in general because they need statewide data. I just want to confirm that my understanding is correct, or is it possible for LEAs to opt out and it would not affect negatively the research and the studies that you're doing? Could you address that, Associate Director Forbush?
Sure, thank you. Yes, that is correct. It's a statewide model that we've been asked to implement. And because of that statewide model, you've got to use data across the state to develop it. And so we haven't actually selected a model yet. It's going to be a value-added growth model, certainly, but it requires that we have data for across the entire state so that we can use all of that data, de-identified and identified for those that have elected to step in, which we have 55 LEAs that wanted to participate of the 100 roughly 80. But we need all of the data so that we can run that data to look at the various kinds of models that would be best suited to our needs in the state. And so there's a selection process still to come, but all of the data would be taken to do that. And so there's the answer to that. But Chair Curry, I also want to clarify that the reason that we didn't go to the LEAs is because the legislation itself directs us to collaborate with the USBE. And so if the net effect of that collaboration is to send us back to the LEAs, then I suppose that could be the case. But we come to you because we were directed to come to you in the legislature. And so and also because we needed state-level data, statewide data, not just district-level data or those that wanted to participate. So I hope that's helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow up. It does. That answers our question. Thank you. Member Lear.
This several times, so I appreciate your indulgence, but I have to push back a little bit against Chair Hymas and say, I know the prime directive of the legislature and the School of the Future is to gather their data and do their job. On the other hand, I feel like, and we've said this consistently for years, the prime directive of the board is to protect student data. So we are merely doing our job, I believe, in looking for alternatives and even voting, perhaps, to say to the legislature, you've put the board in an impossible position. This is an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. We've got at least two prime directives that we are balancing equally and saying we have been told by our parents, by constituents, by usually the legislature, that these data are sacred. So to now be told but you have to give this up because this is something we want, I think it doesn't necessarily defy the legislature to say we have these two really important objectives and we're choosing student protection and data.
Thank you, Member Lear. Member Earl.
Yeah, can I just seek a clarification from School of the Future? Is this, I guess in my mind, I was picturing this as a pilot, and I don't know if that's the right word, but as an interim or as a consideration. But as I'm listening to, I mean, even the Quest speaks to this. This is a state model, not necessarily a pilot. Am I articulating that right?
Is that directed to
Yeah,
Dr. Forbush?
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Forbush here. It's Member Earl. That is correct. It is a pilot, but it is a statewide pilot. So it's to set the pilot in place and to determine the model that will be operating for the 5-year pilot. Then we need statewide data to accomplish that. So that's hopefully that's helpful.
Okay, I think that
Thank you.
seeks some clarity that I don't think when the bill passed, I understood it as more of a, we're going to see how this works, but it's more of, this is what we're going to do, and when you're ready to come on board for districts, maybe that's, and I guess that's the feel I'm getting. Maybe that's not quite the language, but okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have final light from Member Davis. Oh, and then Member Green.
I'll just put a last speak to this. I think the center can go to the LEAs for the identified information from their own participating LEAs if they need to seek greater clarification. And then for the widespread data for the whole state, we can give de-identified information. They said they are using a value-added model. We have value-added growth data here. So it can be a hybrid. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. If an LEA doesn't give it to you, you don't get it at all. We can give what the LEA doesn't in de-identified ways.
Thank you. Seeing no additional lights, the substitute motion before the board is that the board directs staff to explore alternatives with the center to gather de-identified data from those LEAs who are participating with the center. We do have maybe some additional information from Superintendent Dixon.
Thank you, Chair Hymas. So I'm going to take a risk here. And Member Green pointed out Section 8 of code, where it dictates a lot of things for the LEA to collaborate on. So it's very directive about the relationship between the center and the LEA. Absent in that section is anything about data. That data part shows up, at least in one part, in Section 13 or Section 13. And it goes to Chair Hymas, your point about you spent a lot of time in committee on the term collaboration. So it just indicates that we will collaborate around data. I wonder if it wouldn't be prudent to maybe go back to the sponsor of the legislation, to Senator Fillmore, and see if that language around data then gets brought up into Section 8, where it's laid out in that LEA portion. Because you've got this collaboration around data that's ambiguous, that we understand based on conversations. There's an intention for us to do that. So we're arguing the merits of that, and yet at the same time, the relationship is really between the LEA, who has raised their hand to participate, and the center to figure out all sorts of things. So I'm just putting it out there that it might be worthy of a conversation with the sponsor to see if that data element that seems to be ambiguous be put to the LEA piece. That's just, I don't know what that looks like in relation to Member Davis's motion, but it's certainly connected and relevant. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Davis.
I would like to add, if it's friendly, and seek clarification from the bill sponsor.
So there's a
Is that?
motion to amend,
Uh,
and we're trying to find out if a motion to amend on a substitute is in order, and it sounds like it is.
And,
So
and I'm going to say that language would be to seek clarification and potential amendment from the bill sponsor, so that there can be a hybrid. They get some from us and some from the LEAs they're working with.
okay, so the motion here is to amend the substitute motion to add at the end, to seek clarity from the sponsor of the bill and possible amendments. Is there any opposition to amending this substitute motion? Seeing none, our new substitute motion is now that the board directs staff to explore alternatives with the center to gather de-identified data from those LEAs who are participating with the center, and to seek clarity from the sponsor of the bill and possible amendments. Speak to this, Member Davis. Okay, let's go ahead and vote. That motion passes. 11 in favor, 4 in opposition. Those in opposition are Member Earl, Member Carey, Member Reel, and Member Hymas. So that is our substitute motion. Are we good on that? That's it, right? Okay. I'm going to turn time back over to Member Earl. Is this a point of information? Is this on this agenda item that we
I'll be
just voted
nice.
on and
I
finished?
just am wondering if if we can get information in our meeting next week, not next month. And I don't know, maybe that's too soon, but I just.
Well, I don't want to bring this I don't want to bring this back, but.
I'm not bringing it back, but I'm just
I
saying.
know. I'm
can
just
we-
saying, yeah, like who can report on that? Do we have time for that? I don't know. I think we might have to gather some information kind of offline to see. I don't know what the workload of staff is. We didn't put a timeline on there. So, yeah, it's a busy time. So I see your point, Member Earl. It'd be nice to have this by
Well,
next
it's
week.
not just nice. I think there's some political capital that going to be
Agreed.
expended if it doesn't get done in the next
Agreed.
short time.
So I would agree. I don't know how to put pressure on anything here. We've just voted again.
Nope, I'm just making
Okay.
a statement.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Superintendent Dixon says it will be done. Okay. Back to Chair Carey. I'm sorry. I know I strung that out as long as I could. Back to Chair Carey.
Thank you.
And we do have, if Chair Carey, if I could, lunch is here. I'm not saying we have to pause. I'm going to leave it to you as the committee chair to say what do we want to get into. But there is hot soup.
Oh, let's keep it hot. I spoke with Vice Chair Bollinger, and we agree that just given the next matter that's up, probably best to break now and then return and take that on as we're all fed and fresh.
And can I clarify, before we break for lunch, and it sounds like we're going to, there was a semi-misunderstanding. We talked about a different draft coming forth on the next agenda item that we kind of just paused. We didn't postpone it, we just paused on it. It is 609, and so it is in fact draft 4, is that correct? So it is in fact draft 4, and so when we come back, Chair Carey is going to, I know, we'll get it. Chair Carey is going to start back on agenda item 5.6. And just for the board's awareness, Member Hart has a motion pending. So thank you. Let's break for lunch. We will do 31 minutes. So we'll be back at 12:50. Board members, let's go ahead and get started. We appreciate the swiftness in which we had lunch. We still have a few trickling in, but we are jumping back to agenda item 5.6. This is the concern, is that we have a quorum, but we have 0 staff. Can we get somebody, because we are, thank you. We are on Member Hart's motion. And we need it connected. I know. I know. And then, Member Hart, we're going to get staff to pull your motion up. And can we have you re-speak to your motion to get everybody's mind back into the... Yeah, I'm saying when they get back, Kelsey went to get them. Kelsey went to get them. You're welcome to go. We are in draft 4, yes. Yeah. Well, if you can get them out here, great.
Kelsey was nice.
Greg, who do you know? Oh, there's Kelsey. I was going to say, who do you know that can get Molly's motion up on the screen? You guys got it? Perfect. Board members, thank you for being back here. We're just waiting to get the motion back on the screen for us. There was a paper that handed out to you if you want to review that. At the very top is where we're at here. And I'm not saying we have to go in this order, but this is where we're at. Additionally, just as a reminder to the full board, we had lights on the original motion from Bogus, Earl, and then Lear. And I'm not sure if I'll call it out as it is on this paper. If things change, then that's a natural consequence. But for now, we're looking at Member Hart's motion to amend that says the board amend R277-609 draft 4 to remove section 3 on lines 154 through 168. So as soon as that's on the screen, we'll open that up to discussion. First inviting Member Hart to speak to that motion, and then we'll go from there. Board members, can we speak to the motion? It is in front of you. Can we speak to it without it being on the screen? Is that okay? Let's go ahead and proceed. Vice Chair Hart, if you'll speak to your motion.
Okay. My motion is that the board amend R277-609 draft 4, which is draft 3 with the amendments that we voted on. It was just cleaned up and now is in your materials identified as draft 4. And my motion is simply to remove section 3, which refers to the LRBI Technical Assistance Manual. So in the hopes, with the additional motions that I would like to make eventually, hopefully, to pull that out so that we can move the rule forward so our practitioners have a rule because they desperately need a rule, and allow our staff, which they have, they want this time and they want to make it exactly right, because we don't want to keep seeing this back in every meeting. Gives them the time to clean up some additional items and bring the LRBI back to committee, which would then allow the LRBI Technical Assistance Manual to then be married to the rule in a later date. That's all there's nothing nefarious in it, just trying to give staff some time to make some cleanups that are based on new rules, new stuff, and make it perfect for our practitioners without holding up the 609 discipline rule.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hart. Point of clarification. We are on draft four. What came out of committee was draft 3 as amended, which naturally fell into a draft 4. So there was confusion in the past, but we are on draft 4, yes. And then I have Member Lear. Yes, let's get your microphone. There you go.
It would be really helpful. Thank you, Kelsey. It would be really helpful when that's the case that either we'd get an email or something, or you'd lead the discussion with that, because I always sit here wondering, especially with law and licensing, this is not the draft I read. So it would be helpful if we knew that in the beginning. Thanks. In the future, and no blame.
Yeah, and we're working on it. We've I think our committee chairs are obviously hearing this, and so I'll ask them to just keep an eye on things as they come up on our backup and just double check. So yes, it was what came out of committee. If you remember, Member Lear, was draft 3 as amended,
Right.
which naturally falls
Which
once
is
it's
great.
cleaned up.
I just
Yeah.
need that reminder.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect. So, Member Bogus, speaking to the motion.
No, sir, I have an amendment after this passes.
Okay.
Or is voted on.
Okay.
Is
let's
passed.
go
Is
ahead and.
Done.
Are you speaking to this amendment here or this motion? Go ahead, Member. Yeah, Member Lear. Let's get her back on.
I've pretty much resolved my concern about, I mean, I'm 80% there. I do retain some concern that if we take this out of the rule, even for 2 months or 3 months or whatever, there is some, there might be some confusion among teachers about if it's still, and that's giving teachers a lot of credit that they, or maybe us a lot of credit that it matters what rules we pass. But I am concerned that there'll be a period of time that this is not in there clearly supportive of what a teacher might do under this, the LRBI handbook. So, and I've been assured by Leah and Deputy Newey and Assistant Superintendent Leah that they'll do this quickly and that there are other provisions that cover most of the areas. But I still think it's kind of a troubling way to do things, even understanding the reasons for it.
Thank you. Over to Member Earl.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit of a response there. I know in the manual itself, it does indicate in some areas that we, on our site, have additional strategies and resources. I reached out to my districts, gosh, I don't know now, maybe time flies, right? Sometime last year at the end. And just asked, are you using this? What's their frequency? I wanted to know the usage, right? What sections are you using? How much are you using? What's your, actually I asked quite a few people that I came in contact with that are superintendents or directly associated in some way. And some of them use it religiously, especially the back section where it has the technical manual pieces. And then others said, no, we have our own manual we've developed that still adheres to the laws, adheres to all those provisions, but we have our, and I don't know if it went along with a program they have. So it just depends, but I don't think those that used it were like, yeah, this is consistently right. So I don't think it's going to impact the usage. So anyways, I just am sharing that. That's the feedback I got because I wanted to know, is this a value? Is this not a value? And it was kind of a mix depending on depending on the district itself.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wood.
So a question, follow up with Member Lear. We did this before where we pulled something out, and within about 5 days, we had multiple people saying, do I have to throw all those away? You pulled it out. I don't know if you remember when we did that with well, not this board, but last summer, we pulled something that was incorporated by reference out, and it created a lot of heartache, and we had to come back and reincorporate it in. Is there a way to message this that, no, we're not getting rid of it, no, you don't have to throw them out, this is just to help us take the time to fix it? I just don't, the message doesn't always get to the end of the row when we're in a middle phase. How do we prevent that frustration?
I don't know if that, where that question lands. Kelsey, go ahead. Did you say that's you? Leah? She's just sitting quietly. You guys volunteered her. Go ahead, Leah.
Thank you, Chair. Leah Voorhees, Interim Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement. Important, excellent point, Vice Chair Wood. I think what we would need to do is Deputy Newey and I and Director Bartlett could get together and create a message that we could share with LEA heads. We could also share with special ed directors and student services directors pretty immediately, like tomorrow, so that they have information about your process should you choose to approve this motion and go this direction. Thank you for bringing that up. It's a really important point.
Thank you. Member Davis.
Why don't we just approve it with it intact, with a caveat that it's going to come back and be revisited when the changes get made, that we don't have to contact 2,000 people?
Is there a motion in that comment?
I have a
Or
question.
you have a response?
No, I have a question. I'm gonna put Deputy Superintendent Voorhees on the hot seat.
Yeah, Member Davis.
I would just sub that if, that's all. I would just sub
So,
that. It'll pass with it and then be revisited when
so
the changes are made.
Okay, so we're putting a motion here. Sorry, what am I looking? I'm looking at our screen here. This, from what I understand, Member Davis is putting forth a motion, which I think essentially would be simply to vote this down. Would that be accurate? It's a motion of opposition. You're speaking against. Okay. I know you took a bite. I could keep like.
Well,
Well, we have let's. You're much quicker, Kelsey. Go ahead. Sorry, Cindy. Will you repeat that, and then Vice Chair Hart has a question that she says, depending on the answer, might remove her motion. So please put your motion there. Member Hart will ask her question, or would you like her to ask her question, and then we'll see if it's necessary.
I mean, I was just going to say we can move the rule forward with the inclusion of LRBI and add to the motion, and will be revisited again when the changes are made to the LRBI.
Okay, so I don't know if we have a staff member keeping that together. I see a Member Hart and a member on the screen. There we go. Do we have a second to that motion? Is it a substitute motion? This is a substitute motion. We have a second. Okay. We're going to go back to Member Davis to speak to this motion, and then we have Vice Chair Hart.
I think people kind of know in their minds what they want to see with this. I just think it would be easier to do this with a specific note. We are going to bring it back with the changes to be revisited than it would be to contact, hundreds of teachers and tell them not to worry.
Thank you. Vice Chair Hart.
Deputy Superintendent Voorhees, it's been, a minute. I don't care what direction we go. I just want to make sure that the LRBI is a top-tier, accurate document for our practitioners. Is there a preference for your staff and you as to how we attack this issue? Or would, I hate putting you on the spot like that, but at the end of the day, I just want to vote for whatever you want in order to make this the best document to put forth for our practitioners. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Interim Deputy Superintendent Voorhees. So the issue with leaving the old version in, which to Vice Chair Wood's point and to Member Davis's point, might be less disruptive messaging-wise, is that you have recently updated 608. You are updating 609, and the current version of LRBI references the previous 609, and we didn't even have a 608, right? Yes, it's just corporal punishment. So the references would not match your current rules. So I think your decision point to the question that Board Member Lear brought up a few comments ago is the communication risk versus the risk of, do you think that referencing previous versions of rules is greater? Which is the greater risk? So yeah, either is a way forward, and the way forward that would be least disruptive to teachers sounds like the one that you're looking at.
And so the LRBI is not yet complete. Is that, it's been a week. Did it miraculously is it perfect now?
So there is a version of the LRBI that the Law and Licensing Committee began to consider last month, didn't get through considering, and did not move forward. Didn't feel like it was ready.
Okay, so what it feels like to me is we have an incomplete LRBI. We have a field that needs 609 because there's a lot of ambiguity in the space. There's news, there's media, we're talking about the punishment of students, and in particular, students that have very unique circumstances. They need 609. They need an accurate LRBI. We don't have an accurate LRBI. We can either move forward with an inaccurate one and confuse the heck out of them that way, or we can tell them that it's coming soon and confuse the heck out of them that way. Pick your poison.
Member Lear. I don't know if you're...
Molly, without looking at every single line of it, at least incomplete. I think that's fair and not updated.
Well,
But there is something in place until it's replaced. So even if it's an earlier version that's not updated, I think I just kind of bristle a little bit at the characterization of inaccurate.
Well, it's referencing code that if you follow what is referenced, you are not following the current law.
So it's not updated.
Right. So it's not updated.
Yeah.
Now, I
Okay.
am not throwing out my LRBI, and I am still using it. But if anything ever says 609, I'm marking that out.
Tomato.
So, we can go either way. It doesn't matter. We just need to pick a lane.
Thanks.
Okay, so the motion then, we have a substitute motion by Member Davis and is that the board approve R277-609 draft 4 on second and final reading and direct staff to bring the rule and the incorporated document back to the board for approval when they are ready. Let me just make sure I've got this correct, because there's a lot more action on this rule. So if this passes, we are approving this draft 4 and directing staff to bring it back. So there's no more motions. Am I understanding this correctly? Member Davis, do you have a question that I know you want to ask it to the board. Well, that's what I'm saying. Turn your mic on. Let's have a discussion. Okay. What I'm saying is we have a motion on the floor that if it passes, then we're moving on to our next agenda item. Is that how I'm reading this? Chair Carey.
Chair, I don't read it that way. I just look at it, should this motion pass, we're just removing section 3 on lines 154 through 1.
We're on the next one, substitute motion.
Oh, then yes, you're 100% right. And I would speak against that motion. Because of that.
Okay. I was fishing for that. I don't get that at home very often, so. Again, let's cue this up for a vote. I'm going to restate it, and we're going to vote. So the motion before the board is that the board approve R277-609 draft 4 on second and final reading, and direct staff to bring the rule and the incorporated document back to the board for approval when they are ready. Board members, let's vote.
Member Green is a no.
Thank you, Member Green. It looks like that motion fails. 13 against, 2 in favor. Those in favor are Member Lear and Member Davis. So that was a substitute motion. This brings us back to Member Hart's motion, and that is that the board amend R277-609 draft 4 to remove section 3 on lines 154 through 166. Member Earl.
Yeah, I would speak in favor of this, but I would also make an amendment because the LRBI is also referenced in line. Give me a second. I have this. There's one other line it's referenced in, so. Yeah, it's referenced in line 378, so we would need to strike it. Let's see. Do you want to put that up? Because I actually. Yeah, well, wherever it's a reference, but you can't just, you could strike that line, but it talks about strategy, so it'd be adding evidence-based behavior strategies to it. And then taking out that align with LRBI manual incorporated by this rule. So you're just referencing evidence-based behavior strategies. That's the only other place it's referenced in the document. So.
Is there, so the amendment is to remove another, let's make sure we have this. The amendment is that the board amend R277-609 draft 4 by striking that align, quote, that align with the LRBI manual incorporated in this rule, close quote, and adding evidence-based behavior before strategies on line 378. I just want to make sure that we are good. If that's your amendment, the feedback was yes. Is there objection to this amendment, to the amendment? Seeing none, that was the amendment to the amendment, so we're going to combine them. So the new motion on the floor then is that the board amend R277-609 draft 4 to remove section 3 on lines 154 through 166, and strike, quote, that align with LRBI manual incorporated in this rule, close quote, and adding evidence-based behavior before strategies on line 378. Yeah, so this is open to discussion, or we can take a vote. This one's a little bit bigger, so I'm not going to do it without objection because this is a main amendment. So, but that is the motion. Member Hart, will you, now that that's been amended, will you make sure that your motion?
That would now be her amendment. She added to my amendment.
She added to your amendment.
Oh, okay.
It was incorporated, and now it's,
Amended the amendment.
yes. Let's not fight over whose it is. I'll say
All right,
it's
all right,
good.
all right.
Okay.
So that, yes, that is the amendment. It takes out the LRBI reference because we would be, for now, taking out the, and it adds evidence-based before strategies, evidence-based behavior before strategies, just for clarity on what we're doing.
Thank you. We have Member Bollinger.
Chair, just a clarifying question for the maker of the motion. So the intent of this is to put it back in once the LRBI manual is updated and in alignment with law. So if somebody in the staff's going to make sure we also change that back in 378.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, affirmative. Okay. So we see the motion. Again, it is that the board amend R277-609 draft 4 to remove section 3 on lines 154 through
Can I push my
166.
Do you want me to do? No.
And by striking that align with the LRBI manual incorporating this rule and adding evidence-based behavior before strategies on line 378. I've got a comment or maybe, okay. With that, then let's vote. Member Green? One more call for Member Green. That passes with the 14 in favor, 1 absent, Member Green. So what comes to my mind is John Johnson saying, chair rules that unanimous. That's what's been coming to my mind ever since going to these committee meetings. I love John Johnson's chair rules that unanimous. Okay, let's move on. Okay, first up we have Member Bogus, and then after Member Bogus, we're going to have Member Earl, and then we have Member Lear was in the queue. I'm not sure if she still wants to be. I'll come back to you in a couple, and then we're going to have Member Hart. Member Bogus, yeah, you don't need to make something up if you don't want to, but Member Bogus, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I would move to amend line number 37 to remove the word prevent and to insert the words to mitigate, and with a second.
Do we have a second to that? Second by Member Brinton. The motion before the committee is that the board amend line 37 by striking the word prevent and insert the words to mitigate. Back to Member Bogus.
Yes, sir. So I just think we are putting teachers in an untenable situation when we think that they have the power to prevent human behavior. They can do anything and everything they can to mitigate it, to all of that stuff, but a full-on prevention is an untenable expectation, and I just disagree with that language. So I think the mitigation efforts are a realistic expectation, but to expect full-on prevention is unreasonable. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Let's move over to Chair Carey.
Oh, I have a motion, I'm sorry, and I don't need to speak.
With that, then, Member Earl.
I actually prefer this language. I just don't, I think I double checked on this because, I mean, when I was researching, I think this is word for word from law. That's my only question. And I do agree with, I think the mitigate is a better direction. I just don't know where we stand when that's the case. So.
What can I ask staff attorneys. I don't care. Mitigate versus prevent. I see what Christina is saying, Member Bogus is saying. Does this change anything? I don't want to spend 30 minutes arguing on mitigate versus prevent, but does this change anything for the LEA, the employees, the educators? Are they going to do something different now that the word to mitigate is in there? And I just throw that out. Maybe it just doesn't land anywhere, but I don't know. I don't know the huge difference, I guess. Okay. Okay, so the motion before the board is that the board amend line 37 by striking the word prevent and insert the words to mitigate. No other questions or lights. Let's go ahead and vote. Member Green dropped off for a second. She might be close. I mean, she might be here. I don't know. Last time I completely missed her. Okay. We've got one more we're looking for. So that passes unanimously with Member Green being absent. Okay, now we go to our next light, which would be Member Earl, our next motion.
Carrie, go first. Is that okay?
If that works for Board Member Carey, if you're ready, please, Chair Carey.
So I have a motion that I submitted to insert a new line 33.
And is this the motion on the screen? Is this the one that you are referencing?
Yes, so classroom management would be next after this. Just because it's definitions and this is accountability, so I just put it first. But yes, Chair, that reflects the motion that I'm making, and then I'd speak to it when permitted.
Perfect. Yeah, let's get this on the floor then. The motion is that the board amend draft 4 as follows. Beginning on line 33 of draft 4, insert the following. Accountability practice is an evidence-based practice that increases academic outcomes as well as decreasing behavior that disrupts the learning environment and holding students accountable for their actions by requiring them to take responsibility for repairing harm and providing restitution when appropriate. Some practices include adapting instruction to increase engagement, working with the parent to establish feedback and ratings, and restorative practices. We have a second by Member Bogus, and back to Chair Carey for to speak.
Thank you. So I think that when I've spoken to practitioners as well as the LEAs in my district, there is a lot covered by the term restorative practice, and I come away that these several educators believe that this is the only option on the table. And I want to make clear through this definition that restorative practice is just one of many, right? I mean, code establishes LEAs, if they choose, can do restorative practice. But I want to make it clear that they have other options as well as more clearly define that whatever practice is used should focus on these elements of accountability, decreasing behavior that disrupts the learning environment, and repairing harm and restitution where possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I believe, okay, Member Bollinger.
I have a couple clarifying questions, if that's okay, Chair. So when we talk about accountability practices, this says that just increases academic outcomes. So in the terms of when we're talking about a lot of this is behavioral, I feel like we're missing that behavior piece. And when you're talking about restorative practices, so in my mind, it would be academic and behavior outcomes, unless I'm misunderstanding that. That's one point. And then question just for feedback, or just clarifying, what do you mean by established feedback and ratings?
Chair Carey, response.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so we have, we want whatever practices the LEA chooses to use to have as an element this requirement that academic outcomes be considered. I do think it addresses the behavior component in the next segment of the sentence. It says, as well as decreasing behavior that disrupts the learning environment. What we don't do is we don't micro-dictate to the LEA, these are the systems that you have to have, these are the practices that we like or don't like. And again, to make clear, this isn't an elimination of the LEA's ability to use restorative practices, as noted in the last segment, and establishing feedback and ratings. Specifically, this means on their accountability practices. We just don't want to pass this and then say, oh, it's working or not working. We want that feedback and system, as they currently do. When I've spoken to superintendents, they're always evaluating their practices that they have in place. This just puts that into rule, that we would be looking at a measurement of, is this effective or not? And if it's not, we revisit it.
Thank you. Member Bollinger, follow-up?
Just follow-up clarification. So when that's just meant to give examples, not saying that they have to be using those practices. Is that correct?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Member Earl.
And I'm going to speak in favor of this. I do think just going to What Works Clearinghouse, you can see whether you like that or not, there's strong evidence in some of these tiers, and I think this just broadens it out where there's many different practices that have strong evidence that are beneficial for students. And I just, once again, I reached out to my districts on about 5 or 6 things over the last couple months, and this is one of those, asking them, what restorative practices do you use? Most of them said if there was something that was restorative justice, meaning it was something that came through the legal system, they were using those practices as they needed to through the legal system, but they didn't use restorative practices within their schools. This more closely aligns for me with what people are doing. They are holding kids accountable. They're having clear expectations. Some of them are even, the ratings, I see that as where you're working with a specific student, working with a parent to try to increase or decrease a certain behavior, right? Just depending on the student, and so that would play into that effect. And there's others out there too. I think this just says there's a broad range, and pick what's going to work for your district and make sure it has some evidence behind it. So,
thank you. We've got Vice Chair Hart and then Member Lear.
Okay, I have 2 questions. One is, accountability practice is not a term I've ever heard before or used. And we're introducing, is there a term that is more, I mean, as a practitioner, it confuses me. Secondly, some practices include that sentence. That doesn't typically go into a definition. Is there some other place we could put that? Because to the point, it's describing possibilities, but it's not tightly a definition. It is an example of what would fit definition. So I'm just adding to the conversation. I'm not prepared to make a motion, but I have a hard time with accountability practice, because if I that's just never, I don't know what that means. And that last line, I don't feel like it fits in the tight category of definitions. I think it pushes it too much towards a particular practice.
So let's kind of come back to that. I guess my thought as well, similar on those lines, if accountability practice, the definition is usually used to define something within the rule, right? So that there's to offer clarity. But just on a quick search, accountability practice is not used within the rule. So it might fall somewhere other than a definition. To Molly's, I think to Molly's point. But let's just chew on that. And I've got member Lear, and then Davis, and then Earl.
My concerns are similar to member Hart's. I'm still not clear about ratings. Ratings seem to be, in my mind, something that are reported, and I don't think there are any ratings from LEAs or individual schools that are reported to anybody about behavioral problems. So that's kind of, I'm still not satisfied with the use of the words ratings. My other concern, bigger, is that we're spending a lot of time on this because Representative Ward wants his bill implemented, the bill he sponsored to be implemented. And so with his attention to that, I'm wondering if we are stretching some of the, or changing some of the provisions of his bill beyond where maybe the sponsor would be comfortable. Or maybe even, we usually don't change them we usually are very consistent in applying the law that's given us. So that troubles me a little bit. And I had a third point there. And then I also agree with Chair Hymas that we don't put definitions in the definitional section if they're not in the rule.
Thank you. Member Davis.
Look, I know that he wants this implemented, but I'd rather do it right than struggle, Chair. And I agree with the premise of the words that are on the board, except for the fact that accountability practice isn't an evidence-based practice. So we'd have to do some changing to that language. And the language needs to be incorporated not as a definition because it's not in the rule, but it is true. When we want to look at restorative practices, we need to look at restoration in a twofold. We need to look at when you do something wrong, you make restoration for that. You help fix it. You help make it better once you've done something wrong, and that's an accountability piece. There's another piece to it that not in lieu of discipline, but after a student is disciplined, then you do work to restore a positive connection and relationship to the school. Some of you might have heard, reprove be times of sharpness and follow, blah, blah, blah. So, I think that both of those pieces need to be in there if we're going to do something like this. But I agree, it's never and shouldn't be in lieu of some kind of discipline. It should be as part of helping children to be accountable. But I think we should postpone it and send it back to committee, but I don't know if that would just throw everything into a tizzy on the Hill.
I'm going to, I don't know if that's a motion or just throwing it out there. So if we come back to that, then we can consider it, Member Davis. But let's go to Member Earl.
Yeah. So, and I've worked with Board Member Carey. We've been checking out the language. So it will have, that's my motions, which I sent out yesterday, has those narrative in it. And let me just articulate why, even though it's not on that motion, it's relevant to this. When you get down to 436, we are now saying implement positive behavior interventions, supports, and restorative practices. We are now telling districts that the restorative practices is what this, more or less, we're putting into this rule that is the way you're going to do your accountability practices. No, well, it isn't when we put it in here, because it now says an LEA shall implement positive behavior interventions, supports, and restorative practices. So the problem I have, and this is, I actually went to our LRBI manual and looked at the research that we're citing in there, because I wanted to say, what is it that we mean by that? And the concern is that the research that we're citing, when you go to the research itself, and there's other research out there, so maybe we'll include that, right? But the point is there's not just one way to do this. There's many evidence-based practices. And that what we're saying here is this is the evidence-based practice. The state board is asking you to do because it's a shall. When in reality, there's a lot of evidence-based practices. And like I said, when I went to my districts, a lot of them do not use restorative practices. They do hold the kids accountable. So you're right, maybe it's not something that everybody's talking about. But the point is even in the research that I looked at that we cited, one was restorative circles. It was a book on restorative circles. It in the book made it so that all kids had to participate. And the practices in there, I think, to me, are very questionable. Not all of them. Some of them were good. But that's just it, is how do you differentiate between those that are in a unhealthy realm and those that are actually productive? I think that's the effort here. And also, like I said, I had sent out some motions that would clean up this section in enough that you can still use restorative practices if that's what you choose, but it better be evidence-based, right, and based on research. And it also better lead to better outcomes. Some of the research on restorative practices that we're citing, actually they had less academic outcomes in those middle schools when they use the restorative restorative practices. So I know there's a broad range, but I don't want our districts to feel like this is what you have to do. And we did that at the bottom of this document. We said, this is what you have to do. You shall. No, you don't even want this in here. It's something
Thank you,
else. It's evidence-based.
Member Earl. So let's go back. The motion before the board then is that the board amend draft 4 as follows. Beginning on line 33 of draft 4, insert the following. Accountability practice is an evidence-based practice that increases academic outcomes as well as decreasing behavior that disrupts the learning environment and holding students accountable for their actions by requiring them to take responsibility for repairing harm and providing restitution when appropriate. Some practices include adapting instruction to increase engagement, working with a parent to establish feedback and ratings, and restorative practices. I'm just going to take a second. I try not to speak too much to these. Although I do like this, by putting this from my understanding, it's going to be meaningless because it's simply a definition. There's nothing in the rule that says that we have to follow this. This is almost like, okay, right? So we're about to vote on this, and if this is voted down, can it be brought back? I'm looking at process here, and so I guess I'm speaking to the maker of the motion saying, if there's another motion somewhere along the line, I know Member Earl said, hey, let Member Carey go first, but maybe Member Earl had one that would put some verbiage in there where this would be relevant. I don't want to waste this, is what I'm saying, essentially. So with that, if there's no other lights or questions or comments, then we will vote on this. Vice Chair Wood.
Sorry, just one question, and I guess that this would go to staff. If you go out and you train on this, is there a district or an LEA in our state that's going to understand what an accountability practice is? Is this a term that they will go, oh, yeah, we're going to do this? Or are we putting forth a new initiative that we're attempting to put out through the state, and then someone moves to another state and they'll say, well, no, we use accountability practices in Utah, and everyone will go, what is that? Or is, I don't have the background, and so I need someone who does and works in this to tell me, yeah, this is a term that they will understand and will move forward and use before I could vote for this.
Dr. Voorhees, do you have a response to that?
Thank you, Chair. Leah Voorhees, interim deputy superintendent. So as far as behavior support is concerned, no. In the team-based problem-solving process, accountability is a component that teams consider and think about and talk about. Accountability practices is not generally a term that is used in literature on its own related to behavior support. When the word accountability is used just generally in education, it's more related to school accountability, right? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, I'm guessing, for most educators would be assessment and accountability. And and the data dashboard and the school report card. Although talking about accountability to both the points of Board Member Earl and Chair Carey is an important component of a school-based team's problem-solving process. Does that respond to your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I've got a light from Member Davis.
I think they're working on some whatever things they're going to make this better, but I just think it's important to say, let's just define it how we want to define it. Accountability practice is not a term of art. If we want to say we want to focus on accountability to clear up this notion that restorative practices doesn't involve accountability or discipline, then let's do that. But I think it just needs to, it can't be done like this, but the concept is important.
Thank you. Member Earl?
How large of an amendment can I make? What's the rule? Can I amend it and add in the other components? My pieces, so maybe it would make sense. Does that make sense? Nope.
So from what I understand, what I just learned, and I think you're getting to this, Member Earl, is there is a place where we want to incorporate this verbiage in the rule.
Yeah.
So if we voted on this, if we voted it in, it would not necessarily be wasted. So go
Let me
ahead.
make
You
the
have the
amendment
floor.
and
Yeah.
add it in, or I can make a substitute motion that adds it in. I don't know what's the most appropriate thing, but.
I believe you could amend.
Okay, so I am going to amend. Do you have my? I have. I have 4 amendment pieces, maybe. Do that. Okay, so on line 62, it would say expulsion means a disciplinary removal from school for a fixed or indefinite period. And then there was some ambiguous language there that said without an offer of educational service or something, an alternative educational service. I'm not sure what that was. The law itself, okay, sorry, let me make the amendment and then someone can second me or not. And then adding in an alternative, education plan is established as outlined in 53G 8208 and that has been reviewed. I think I gotta change that, right? Because we checked, because you can't actually, the LEA can't actually approve. So it's gotta be, has been reviewed and, oh shoot, what was the?
From what I understand, Member Earl, as you're going through nothing's on the floor yet. You know what? Keep going.
Yeah. Sorry, I just moved all at once and people can do what they want. So let me keep reading. Okay, and then on line 379, the appropriate use of accountability practices, and then on 436, LEA responsibility to positive behavior intervention supports and accountability practices, and then there's one more line, 438, and LEA shall implement positive behavior interventions and supports, and that would be it on that one, who would strike the restorative practices.
Can we add line 438 to that so we could get all of those
Do you have that one or
on
not?
one screen? So for Member Earl's final piece of her motion, she wanted to amend line 438. There it is right there. Perfect. Member Earl, does this?
So no, it needs to be that has been reviewed and followed up instead of approved, because they can't actually approve the education plan when someone's been expelled from school. That's my addition.
So the motion on the floor then is that the board approve the following. Not yet, I'm just restating it to make sure it's clear. Line 62, expulsion means a disciplinary removal from school for a fixed or indefinite period. An alternative education plan is established as outlined in 53G-8-208 that has been reviewed and followed up with by LEA administration. Line 379, the appropriate use of accountability practices. Line 436, LEA responsibility to positive behavior interventions, supports, and accountability practices. Line 438, an LEA shall implement positive behavior interventions, supports, and accountability practices as part of the LEA's continuum. My question, oh, do we have a second to that? Second, oh, that's right. We do have a second. Back to Member Earl to speak to this.
Yeah, so the original version, once again, and I was hinting that a minute ago, but it establishes restorative practices as the method or the practice that's to be used. And because it has shall in there, that's the heading, that's all of that. So the accountability practices is to indicate, maybe it needs to be evidence-based behavior practices, I don't know, but the intent is to not narrow the scope of what districts can use, because many are not using that, and this would say this is what you're supposed to use. It's to broaden it out, allowing them to use the evidence-based approaches they're using.
Thank you. We have lights from Member Bollinger and Member Lear, but before we go there, I don't have a cue, so I'm just going to ask it, and I might need staff to help me out here. From what I understand, is that once a student is expelled, the education is on the back of the parent, no longer the LEA. So would we remove without an offer of an alternative education? Once they're expelled, they're expelled. We don't provide that the LEA does not provide that education to them. They've been expelled from that LEA. Member Earl, let's get your microphone. Hold on. There you go. Now that you've finished, say that again.
And just referring to 53G-8-208, which actually goes through all the provisions related to the fact that a parent is now responsible, but they can ask for assistance. But instead of typing that out, it's just referencing the code there.
Without getting into a back and forth,
Yeah.
I guess my question is why remove, if I remove without an offer of an alternative education, to me that's pretty clear that the LEA, to the LEA saying we're not offering you an alternative education, rather than saying for an indefinite period, an alternative education plan is established as outlined, right? To me, it's like, okay, do I have to do something? Okay, I'll check the law, go through that.
So, and let me just ask this question. I guess this is where I went, maybe I misunderstood. So maybe when I read it, without an offer of an alternative education plan, so if a student, if they did offer something, would that no longer be considered an expulsion? Does that make sense? So I guess I'm looking at it that way. Maybe it's not a fair way to look at it, but that's how I interpreted it.
Well, yeah, I don't know what, I guess I'm asking what reads clearly, and this is why I'm kind of asking staff who has done this. For me, and I am on the lowest of low of school leaders, so help me out here. I'm trying to make this clear, because when I expel a student, to me it's like, I'm not, here you go parents, they're no longer part of my LEA. And I don't want to come up with an alternative education plan. I can, I guess, with the parent and say, yeah, you know, you should, you could, not you should, but you could consider this as I guess what I'm doing, Member Earl, is I'm trying to seek clarity. Removing that, does that give clarity or does that offer confusion? For me, it obviously offers confusion.
Okay, then, yeah, fair argument.
So I guess if I'm asking to amend, I would not remove the without an offer, but of. So that's what I would amend this amendment to not strike those words without an offer of. However, does that create a contradicting phrase in your motion?
You're saying to leave that piece in?
To leave without an offer of an alternative education plan.
I'm fine with that. I just wanted the clarity that I don't know. I felt like I wasn't sure what that was, but maybe the body feels like it was clear enough even without it. Are you wanting to leave it in with the other?
Well, we'd have to wordsmith
Yeah, yeah,
around
yeah.
it. I'm just seeking clarity. I think Member Bollinger is offering a point of clarity and a comment. If we'll go to her, then we can circle back here. Member Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I think where the confusion's coming from is 53G8208 is specifically for students with disabilities. So if a student is removed from their educational setting for more than 10 days, they are required to have an alternative plan for education. So I think that's where the confusion is getting in. That is, the 53G8208 is not for all general ed students, only students with disabilities. And under IDEA, that's already going to be something that has to be offered.
Thank you. Does that, Member Earl, let's get Member Earl.
And safety, student suspended or expelled. If a student is suspended or expelled for the public school under this part for more than 10 days, the parent is responsible for undertaking. It doesn't, down further, I think there are some provisions down further, but I don't.
Member
This is
Bollinger, can you
anybody
clarify?
that's expelled or suspended.
Member Bollinger, can you clarify where you're seeing the?
Yeah, so at the very top where it says 53G8208, students suspended or expelled, responsibility of parents, application for students with disabilities.
But it has all three of those provisions in here. It's not just for those students. So that part, yes, there is a piece in there, but the one is not, that's any student. That's just a summary of the provisions.
Okay, so.
Member Lear is pointing out
Yeah, so
parenthesis 5. Is that right, Member Lear? Yeah, let's get Member Lear.
I just can maybe flesh out a little more of what Member Bollinger is saying. And also add that when we talk about talking to your LEAs, the very common understanding of the difference between expulsion and suspension is with expulsion, except for students with disabilities, there's no ongoing relationship between the school, and they can change that. The school has an option to make that different, but typically it makes it so. If we look at parentheses 5, it says this part applies to students with disabilities to the extent permissible under applicable law or regulation. That goes on and gives more explanation about that. But I think it's misleading to the teachers that we so love and work with that we say expulsion now is something other than what they've understood. So I think it's kind of explained poorly in this section because they wait till the end to say, wait, this is really, because there's no place before that in that section that it talks about a plan for expelled students. It's just only in parentheses 5, and then it's specific to students with disabilities.
So is expulsion defined in the law? I'm hesitant to change the definition of expulsion.
It's not well defined in the law.
Okay.
This is one of the better places actually that addresses it. I'm just talking about if you read a lot of education law cases, expulsion means without additional help from the LEA unless the LEA chooses. This is about the best place it's explained in the law.
This is the place to have it, okay.
That's how bad it is. But the last part of it is, I think, the clarifying piece that says, if that's where the plan is discussed. There's no plan discussion up above that. Leah can maybe say that better
Thank you.
than I do.
Member Earl, back to Member Earl.
Number 1. So it's a parent is responsible for undertaking an alternative education. That's exactly right. So it's according to what is listed here, so which would provide for both of the things you're referring to. Someone who's expelled, right? The parent is responsible for that plan. If it's a student with the IEP, special needs, whatever, there's different provisions. So right.
Do we have?
It has the kid at home, so the parent doesn't have to do a plan. Nobody checks on that.
Yes, they do. In here, they're supposed to check once a month.
Yeah, you ask your LEAs how many do that.
Okay, so we have an amendment to amend, it's before us here. Member Bogus, are you speaking to this amendment to amend? No, you're fine. Take a second. Okay. So I'm gonna restate this amendment to amend, and then I think we are ready to take a vote. And I don't know, can we amend an amendment to amend? You can't, right? Too many, too far. Okay. Let's do this then. The amendment to amend by Member Earl is to amend line 62. Expulsion means a disciplinary removal from school for a fixed or indefinite period. An alternative education plan is established as outlined in 53G-8-208 that has been reviewed and followed up with by LEA administration. Line 379, line 436, and line 438, each of those lines replace restorative with the term accountability practices or accountability. And then finally, I would ask my question before Member Davis speaks in this. And I'm going to ask this to staff, and if you don't have an answer, that's okay. And when I say staff, I mean Leah. This might be clear to somebody like me. It might be clear to LEAs. But what happens, especially in an expulsion, this is no light matter, is this is when parents get involved, and they start reading the rules, right? And they start reading the law. And if there's confusion, and the LEA says, we interpret it this way, and parent says, no, the law says this, that creates a problem. That creates lawsuits, and that creates more frustration than we want to, handle, or we can handle. So what does this change of expulsion do for our LEAs and parents? And again, I'm pushing this to parents because I've been through this process personally. This is a moment when parents are involved, similar to other heavy hitting things like IEPs, right? Our IEPs know the law. And when you put an expulsion forward, parents learn the law. So please, Dr. Voorhees.
Thank you, Chair. Leah Voorhees, Interim Deputy Superintendent. So if the student has a disability, there's a very prescriptive process. It doesn't change, it's not going to change anything, okay? If the student does not have a disability, so doesn't have an IEP or a 504 plan, I think that Member Lear's point about this is not the practice that LEAs are currently using, and I think you stated that as well, Chair, that requiring an education plan would be new practice for LEAs. I think there are definitely LEAs who talk to parents and students about the process, about the discipline, and may establish a plan. But requiring an alternative education plan, if that's what this is saying, would be new practice. Is that responding to the question that you're asking, Chair?
That's helpful, and that's going to, thank you, Dr. Voorhees, that does respond. So here's where I'm at, and again, I'm one of 15. This line 62 blows everything up, and I can't make another motion. Can I make a motion to divide? I'd like to divide, because I'll vote no on changing the expulsion definition, but I'll vote yes on the others if I'm completely open. So for me, I'm going to place a motion before the board to divide these four. Is there a second? Yeah. Okay, there's a second. So that's the motion on the floor. Raise your hand if there's a comment to dividing. Seeing none, they are divided. So now we are going to, I can't backtrack, but for me, the last three are the same, but we'll cover that in a minute. That I would like to. I wasn't as specific, so we should have two motions. One being line, if that pleases the board, one concerning line 62, and then the second motion being grouping, because they're all the same motion, line 379, 436, and 438. Any opposition to that? Raise your hand. Okay, so here we are on this first amendment to amend, meaning line 62. Let's have discussion to this before we vote on it. We've had discussion to this. As the maker of the motion, I would speak against this just for clarity's sake. I don't think we've had a big problem in the field with the definition of expulsion. I don't see how changing it here adds or removes from what was originally on the table, which was the topic of accountability practices. And so for that reason, I would speak against the motion. So with that, again, we're speaking to the changes on line 62, definition of expulsion, and we've got Member Bogus. Okay, we're on to Member Davis. Okay.
Now me?
Yep.
Okay. I would like our staff, if possible, or someone here who can give us clarity on, I am suspending you. I am expelling you. There is an expulsion and there is a board release. I want to know the difference between those four things and how they're used in code and in rule. And I want to point out that when we say expulsion means removal from school for a fixed or indefinite period, just a Google search of this makes the definition incongruent, because suspension is temporary. You're taken out of school for a set length of time. Expulsion, being expelled, is permanent, and you'll have to go to a new school. Or pretty much that is like a board release. So I think we've got to get our stuff together, and we got to get our language right in this. And then the word exclusion is a general term covering both suspension or expulsion, and most of the time the word exclusion will be used officially. So that's a different option that can be used if you want to have both of those in there, but this isn't going to work the way it is, I don't think, but I would like clarity with those four terms: suspension, expelling, and expulsion, and a board release.
Sure. Deputy Superintendent
Please,
Newey.
if someone can.
Hi, Elise Newey, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. So this is an excellent question and one that staff grappled with in making this rule. I will say that we initially had in this definition a 10-day period, because that is, we did a review of all the states in the nation and what are their definitions, and that seemed to be a common element. However, when we took that to the superintendents and said, how does this look? How does this align with what you do? There was actually some pretty big differences in the way that they defined expulsion at their local level. So that was why we changed it to this. What we took was in, what's the code again? 53G 8206. It does refer to a local school board having the authority to expel a student for a fixed or indefinite period, provided that the expulsion shall be reviewed by the district superintendent. So that is really the only definition that we could point to that had a mention of time period. So we included that. A suspension would include an alternative education service, right? So that may be that a suspension could be in school suspension. There's an alternative setting in the school. It can be an at-home suspension where work is being done at home. That was fairly common. And so that was the differentiation between an expulsion where the district is essentially saying, or the LEA is essentially saying, we no longer have responsibility for your educational services. And we have signed off on that as in an LEA. Right, whereas suspension is saying, we don't want you in your typical placement at school, but we are still providing you with educational services of some sort. And so that was the differentiation between the two in both law and in practice. And so that's as far as we went, and we left it broad so that districts can continue to define it as far as they needed.
May I follow up, Chair?
Please.
Personally, I think we need to define suspension as temporary and expulsion as a permanent release where you're not providing educational services. And And maybe we have to use the words board release. I've done all of these things. And I've never considered a board release or a total expulsion as a suspension. And so I just think to add clarity to the field, because the definitions that are just the standard everyday use definitions are separating suspension, temporary, expulsion, permanent. But then you go to state code and it mixes the two in. But then you go to the LEAs and they're separate again, more to a standard definition. So I just think to add clarity, it would still fit the code, I guess, even though the word expulsion shouldn't be used for both. But we can say a suspension is temporary and expulsion is permanent. I don't know. I just think
An expulsion is not permanent. Just
an
a
expulsion
point
is
of
permanent.
clarification.
A suspension is not permanent. An expulsion is permanent.
I can
It's a board
expel for 10 days and that student could come back to my school.
That's a suspension. And maybe we need to use the words incorporate, because according to this, expulsion is permanent. So you'd have to look at maybe looking at the words board release. A board release is done. It's over. You're not coming back here ever.
I guess I'll just say point of clarification, and again, I could be wrong, but an expulsion can go up to 180 days and can be amended by a board to be reduced down to anywhere between 10 and 180 days. So
Anything finite like that
it's
typically
defined.
is called a
That's
suspension.
what I'm saying. This is defined. This is why I'm speaking against this motion, is because we're trying to redefine something that is working. That the LEAs already know is working. So I know we have lots of comments on this. This is rare, but we have another time certain. I know. And we are looking at a time certain in agenda item 12. So currently we're in 5. Agenda item 12, there's a time certain for Representative DeFay, and I believe that she's online right now. So again, processes. Do we need to move to table this? I guess we could talk about tabling. We could say, is this ready to go back to committee? Sorry, Chair Carey. But there's clearly some work that needs to be done on this, and some conversations. I like the direction. Quite frankly, I like the discussion. So we need to either table this or move it somewhere, but we do need to jump to agenda item 12 for just a few minutes before we
Can
come
I
back.
move to postpone the rule until next month?
I have a motion to postpone the rule to next month's board meeting. Point of order by
Her
Member
clarification,
Bogus.
I don't know what it is, sir,
Sure.
but I was told earlier in this meeting, this rule is needed now. So
Not needed.
that was
Gotcha.
discussed when it was discussed whether or not to remove that section. It was discussed, so just so we're all on the same page, either it still applies or it never applied.
So we're speaking to a motion that hasn't been seconded yet. There's a motion on the floor is that this be deferred. I can't remember the exact term you just
Yeah,
used.
and I mean, I heard that the rule is needed, and that's why I moved forward in the last one. But you shouldn't move forward a rule that's going to add
Do we have a
more
second?
problems.
Second. Okay, speak to that motion. Member Davis?
I'd rather wait.
Okay. She'd rather wait to speak to it?
No.
Please, Member Lear.
Aside from all of the things that have been mentioned, there are additional pieces to expulsion and suspension that are nowhere in here, but I think that at least this board should understand, and this is based on years and years of case law, things like more extensive due process for expulsions than suspensions. Things like the board, and this is in Utah law, only the board can expel, whereas lesser administrators can suspend. So it's a bigger picture that I think we ought to understand and discuss further.
So the motion before the board is that this is tabled until next full board meeting. Is that? It's your motion? How can I? Yeah, I'm happy to support it.
Committee tomorrow if it's not 24 hours.
No, it wouldn't be able to be reposted in there. We could, is it already in there? The document is in there, not the rule. We could try to do carryover for tomorrow. But again, Member Davis, happy to.
I think we postpone it to carry over for tomorrow, and then it will give time to do some of this language, because I have some amending on another one that's going to follow this one because of the word evidence-based on accountability practice, because that's not how it should be defined. So.
Okay. So the motion is to postpone until tomorrow afternoon. It's been seconded by Member Lear. Is there any opposition to this? Member Earl's light is on. Go ahead.
I'll have to re-vote.
Well, we're not going to vote if there's any opposition.
There is no opposition.
Okay, so it's done. We're gonna bring this back tomorrow. Let's move to agenda item 12.1, and can we get set up for Representative DeFay? How do we?
She's there.
I mean, there she is. Does she just want to start speaking, or do we want to? The agenda item. Welcome, Representative DeFay. We're happy to have you here with us. This is a general session legislative prep portion of the agenda, and. Deputy Superintendent Newey, do you need to say anything, or can we turn time right over to Representative DeFay? I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can do any intros or clarifications or queuing.
Well, thank you. Elise Newey, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. We have been working with Representative DeFay for quite some time on a particular bill dealing with AI, and we have been working with her because there's been so much that the board has done in the realm of AI and education and setting these systems and procedures up. And so she's been wonderful to work with, and we invited her here to present this bill to you and get your feedback and thoughts. So that's why, and we're so grateful that she could join us today.
Thank you. Representative DeFay, please.
Yes, hello. Sorry, I'm moving around. There's groups of people moving everywhere, so hopefully you can hear me. Yes, this bill kind of came after we created an AI learning lab on the commerce side of our state. And I think that USBE is doing some great things with AI, and higher ed are doing some things with AI. The government wants to see what is going to happen with AI. They want to monitor how things are being used in schools. We thought it would be great to have a task force to inform policymakers on what AI is being used, what tools are being used, inform us on the framework that you guys have already established, which is absolutely fabulous. I've worked with the governor's office. He doesn't want me to task forces, so we will see if this happens. If not, maybe we can create a working group, but really it's a task force to get together, see how it can help our teachers, help our students, and then examine any pitfalls, stay in front of the ball as much as we can as this technology develops. So that's really the purpose of the bill.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from board members? I don't see any. Representative DeFay, I know that you are busy. We appreciate your time. And I guess I would just encourage board members, if you do have questions as you ponder over this and think about what next steps are, to reach out to Representative DeFay. Is that an okay invitation for me to give, Representative?
Yes, absolutely. Please reach out to me anytime, any concerns you have. I do want to address, I have a bill, House Bill 189. Some teachers are having some consternation over it. It would prohibit teachers from requiring travel and fees in order to earn a grade or course credit. You know, the arts teachers are really worried about this. They want their students to be able to go see shows. And we also have problems with other schools that have auditoriums that maybe aren't located on their campus. Or, you know, you have to travel for part of your school. So we've made some amendments there. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that's not, the intent isn't to prohibit classroom learning. We just want to make sure that we are being fair and equitable to students, that we're not making them drive long distances and pay large fees in order to earn an A in a classroom. So that's where it is. But if you have any questions on it, or you have teachers reach out that are concerned, please have them reach out to me. We're amending the bill. It's a work in progress, but just kind of want to let you know that that's where we are with that.
Thank you. I do have one. It looks like some lights have come up since you've been speaking. We have a comment or a question from Member Bollinger. and then Vice Chair Wood.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify the bill number for AI. Was it 168?
Oh, that's a great question. Probably.
Yeah, it is HB 168. And I just wanted to thank Representative DeFay because when this first came out, the bill dropped. I immediately contacted her and said, wait a minute, have you seen our framework? Have you been working with our AI specialist, Matt Winters? He's done a great job. And she said, yep, we're all in there. So I wanted to thank her for reaching out to our staff first before so often we get legislation that hasn't kind of been working in tandem with what's already being done. So thank you for the work you're doing there.
Thanks.
Thank you, Representative. Again, thank you for your time, and
Thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate it. Good luck to you up there.
Thanks for all you do. We appreciate you. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Okay, board members, we will come back to 12.1. We appreciate Representative DeFay and her time spending here with us. Let's jump back. We have a few more items, or a couple more items in Law and Licensing Committee report, so we're going to turn back over to, and just a reminder for the public, the R277609 has been tabled until tomorrow. So with that, Chair Carey, let's proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Just for point of clarification, on 5.7, this seems to have been addressed by Vice Chair Hart's motion regarding the LRBI. So there is no motion for the board, and that remains the same. Next item is 5.8, R277627, the early warning system amendment. And the motion for the board is that the board approve R277627 early warning system draft 3 on second and final reading.
Thank you, Chair Carey. The motion before the board is that the board approve R277-627 early warning system draft 3 on second and final reading. Not seeing any lights. Let's go ahead and take a vote. Hold on. We do have questions on this one? Okay. Let's pause. That's okay. We've got Member Bollinger first and then Member Earl.
I'll let Member Earl go first.
Okay. Member Earl?
Yeah, I have just a couple amendments here. I don't know where is it up there? So, that the board amend on line 25 by striking or behavioral challenges and replace with failure. So it would read, sorry, we get stuck on, let me pull up the full piece. Is it draft 2, correct? 3, draft 3. So we're working off draft 3? So 26, so then it would, on line 26, so it would say, be at risk of academic failure, it would add failure there, and then striking behavioral challenges. Do you want me to do these one at a time?
So is this, let's just make sure that this is correct, and we can see if we have a second and move forward.
Yeah, and then on line 31, let me make sure it's the right. No, actually it would be 34. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong draft when I did this.
Point of order by Member Bogus. Let's turn your light on, please.
We were on draft 4, and now I'm looking back, and it appears as if we changed that to draft 3. So
there's
I'm very
only a draft.
confused.
We are, the motion that came out of committee is that the board approve R277-627 early warning system draft 3 on second and final reading. And this is, and then Member Earl's amendment is to the, from the motion. So we're on draft 3.
Okay.
So yes, and then on line 34, not 31, because I used the wrong draft, it would be effectively identify students at risk of academic failure. Those would be the recommendations I have.
Do we have a second to that motion? We have nothing. We have a second by Member Brinton. So, back to you, Member Earl, to speak to this motion.
Yeah, I just think when we're talking about thresholds, we're looking at provisions, but those provisions are there to help the academic success of students. So I think I would just recommend that we take this into consideration.
Okay. Thank you, Member Earl. Member Bollinger.
I think that when I'm looking at draft 3, I think you're trying to work off of line 26.
Yes. Once again, I had the wrong version when I was putting it up. So it'd be 26 and 34, the line numbers. But the content is the same, so.
Okay. So the motion before the board is that the board amend draft 3 of R277-627 on line 26 by striking or behavioral challenges and replace with failure, and on line 34 by adding of academic failure. Do we have discussion to this? Member Lear.
I'm trying to square the earlier words, including discipline, attendance, behavior, course failures, and other criteria determined by an LEA, used to assess and identify students who may be at risk of academic, so then it would say academic failure, period. And the challenge I have is a student could have some of the examples included previously, but not be at risk of academic failure. But you still have to address that. I believe that a teacher would want to address that concern for the good of the class, but also for the good of the student, because he can't. His behavior issues are every much as debilitating as if he were almost failing the class, and it hurts both him and the class. So that's I'm not sure challenges is the right word, but I think we can't ignore that there are behavioral concerns, even if a student is excelling. I'm thinking of my grandson.
Thank you, Member Lear.
Don't tell him.
Member Earl, do you have a response to this or a different comment?
No, I guess not. So, no, I don't. I just think you could have behavioral challenges that are, I don't know, that maybe it's just in the person's, a teacher's opinion that there's a challenge to the child's behavior that, I just don't want that to be the focus. It should lead back to the academic success of the student as well as the other students. So, and behavior, yes, we reference behavior up above because it does. We do reference, behaviors do impact the student. So, but that's just the overall focus. In my view, don't vote for it if you don't want it, so.
Okay, we have Member Lear back. Okay, thank you. Member Bogus.
Thank you, sir. So I think that the motion as Member Earl has presented it actually addresses both of those. So it's redundant or duplicative, in my opinion, to say we're going to use a metric of behavior to address behavior. And so I would just speak in support of the motion.
Okay, let's queue up the vote then. Again, the motion is that the board amend draft 3 of R277-627 on line 26 by striking or behavioral challenges and replace with failure, and on line 34 by adding of academic failure. Let's go ahead and vote. Member Hart, do you have a vote on this one? No, we don't. Okay. That passes 11 in favor, 3 in opposition, and 1 semi-absent. We have those in opposition are Member Reel, Member Kelly, and Member Lear. Okay, with that, back to Chair, or actually, we have an underlying motion here, right? So that was an amendment. So the underlying motion then is, sorry, it's not coming up on this other screen. Oh, here it is. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, Member Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things we discussed in our committee meeting is in code, it does state that the board will set what those thresholds are for an early warning system. The way our rule currently is stated is that we are delegating that to LEAs based off of evidence-based practices. As I've talked to a few LEAs, the concern is, one, if there are small LEAs that may not have the capacity or staffing to research and know what those are, not sure how to set those thresholds. And then number two, if we leave it always to the LEAs to complete that, they may have to go back to their board if they adjust or change that on a regular basis, which then adds an extra step or line. So with that, I've had conversations with Chair Carey and as well as with Deputy Superintendent Newey. And so I would like to make an amendment to the motion, and maybe you can help me with the language on that. The amendment I want to make is to still allow for flexibility of LEAs while still giving guidance to LEAs on what evidence-based practices are. There's a research, quite extensive research done by Johns Hopkins University that provides that. So I would say that the board approve R277627 Early Warning System Draft 3 as amended on second and final reading, and direct staff to create a USBE guidance document that provides evidence-based practices for indicators. And we can wordsmith that if we need to, Elise. So it would just be adding at the end, the board directs staff to create a guidance document that sets threshold, or that recommends thresholds for early warning systems, and then bring that back to the board for approval.
Let's just make sure that before we call for a second, let's make sure that that amendment is, matches your intent. Member Bollinger? Member Bollinger, does that meet your intent?
Clarifying question.
Well, let's get it on the floor and we can debate
well,
it.
I mean, we do have just a couple little changes we'd like to make, and so our options are to do this or to send it back to committee. I just want to make sure that there's no rush in this, so because I know we're already behind. So staff, if I could ask clarifying question, is there anything that's gonna, if we push this back to committee, are we holding anybody back?
Elise? So there's, I guess, we're kind of in limbo here, right? Because we have a potential motion that has not been seconded, so there's really nothing on the floor yet. So we're asking a question about a motion that's non-existent yet.
Yes, so I guess the clarifying question on is that, does that guidance document need to come back to the full board for approval or just to the committee for approval?
If it went
to the committee and then the full board.
I would recommend that.
Okay, that's why I just want to make sure I have the right language before we move forward.
So let's change that language to bring it to the Law and Licensing
to the Law and Licensing
Committee
and then the full board for approval.
Well, we don't need to say and then the full board because you'll make that motion
perfect.
in the committee.
So, and bring it to the Law and Licensing Committee.
For approval, yeah.
For approval. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so do we have a second to that? Okay, we have a seconds to that. So the motion again is that the board directs staff to create a guidance document that recommends thresholds for early warning systems and bring it to the Law and Licensing Committee for approval. Back to Member Bollinger to speak to her motion.
I'll
I'll waive, Chair. I think I've spoke to it.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other lights, let's go ahead and vote. Member Carey?
I have another motion.
Let's go ahead and vote. Okay, that passes 14 in favor, 1 in opposition, that opposition being from Member Bogus. And so that's as amended. We're good, Chair Carey.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a motion, and that would be on line 30. And the motion would be, and then I'll speak to it, but the motion would be, the language there is set thresholds for the early warning system in alignment with, and I'd like to insert USBE guidance, comma, and then.
I'm sorry, Member Carey, I'm being reminded that she had made an amendment to the motion to approve, so we need to go back to the final, or to the, it brings us back, well, even still, we're back, and to the underlying motion as amended, but Vice Chair Carey, or Chair Carey is in order to make his motion. Yeah, when we go back, we'll make sure it's amended. My apologies. Do we have a second to Chair Carey's motion? We have a second there. Chair Carey, to speak to that.
Yep, that's perfect. And if I could speak to it, Chair.
Please, yes.
And just, we just approved staff to prepare the guidance document. We just wanted a reference in the rule that the guidance document is there. And so that's the reason for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Makes sense to me. The motion before the board then is that the board amend R277-627 draft 3 by adding USBE guidance to line 30. Let's go ahead and vote. That passes 14 in favor, 1 in opposition, being Member Bogus. With that, let's go to the underlying motion, which is that the board approve R277-627 Early Warning Systems Draft 3 as amended. Well, let me see here, because we have to direct staff as well. Here it is. That the board approve R277-627 Early Warning System, Draft 3 as amended on second and final reading, and that the board directs staff to create a guidance document that recommends thresholds for early warning systems and bring it to the Law and Licensing Committee for approval. Okay, let's vote. Okay, that passes 14 in favor, 1 in opposition, that being Member Bogus. Chair Carey?
Yeah, that concludes the business of law and licensing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, board.